This is your reality check.
Welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. Today is July 26th, and it's just me, producer Pat. We'll be back with a full panel show next week, but today we have an interview for you to answer a listener's question. Checker Kieran wrote this to us. Hey guys, love the podcast. Wondering if you would consider doing a segment on the Irish Famine, specifically the common theory I see online and amongst friends that it was a British plot bordering on genocide. I'm Irish, and every time I see the famine mentioned online, the top comment is always about how Ireland produced more than enough food, but it was exported to Britain, and the government in London didn't do enough to help, and may have in fact tried to make it worse. I want an impartial, fact-based examination, as people are prone to exaggeration when it comes to historical events with the number of fatalities involved in this case. Thanks. Well, that email is a tall order that I think anyone on the TRC panel would have to do a lot of research to answer, but luckily, we have a friend. Joe Coohill has been on the show several times. He's probably better known as Professor Buzzkill from the podcast of the same name. It's a great show where he sets the record straight by busting historical myths. Joe is an historian and author, and one of his books is called Ireland, A Short History. Needless to say, he is exactly the guy we needed to talk to in order to answer Kieran's questions. And with that, I hope you enjoy our chat with Professor Buzzkill. Welcome back to The Reality Check, Professor Buzzkill.
Thank you very, very much. Can I say hello, checkers, like you do to everybody out there? That's my favorite thing to do on your show.
And we'll say hello to any Buzzkillers that might be dropping in. So, Joe, we asked you for some of your time today to help us out with a listener question about the Irish famine. The second I saw this question, I knew we had to have you on. It's so in your wheelhouse, not just because you look at history myths on your show,
right,
but also because you wrote a book on the history of Ireland.
Yes, that's one of my academic books that I wrote. It's in its fourth edition, and I'm preparing the fifth edition now, as a matter of fact.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, you know, there seems to be an uptick in famine questions on the internet and famine postings of various types. So it seems to be a revival of interest. Every 2 or 3 years, it seems to come up again.
Interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I wonder why.
No, I don't know, but it certainly. I don't think Reddit helps, or Reddit is a rumor factory. So that just keeps things going.
So Kieran, who wrote in, was asking about common theories that the Irish famine was a British plot bordering on genocide. He also asked about whether the numbers of fatalities could have been exaggerated. But before we dig into that, Christina and I were talking, we both agreed that we were pretty ignorant about this subject.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a very distressing subject. About as many bad things all happen at the same time and in a row as possible, both in the beginning of the famine and as the famine progresses. So it's certainly not a happy subject, and that's not unusual for distressing subjects to become, myth factories and rumor mills, because it just seems to fit. If so many people die in Ireland and the British Empire is supposedly at its height, it almost seems as if it was planned genocide, but as we'll see in a minute, it wasn't.
I don't want to put out any spoilers there, but I was shocked at the death toll numbers. I know you're going to get into that a bit later, but that was one particular thing about the famine that really shocked me, to Pat's point.
Well, maybe we can start with a bit of a history lesson.
Okay.
What and when was the famine, and how did it start?
The famine starts in Ireland anyway in 1845. The blight, what's called the potato blight, Phytophthora infestans, actually began life on the northeast coast of the United States and I guess the eastern coast of Canada. And it was caused small problems there, very small problems, but then somehow the infestation spread to Europe. And it hits Ireland very, very hard. Well, it hits Ireland extensively in 1845. And what happens is people start to notice when they harvest their potatoes that they're just absolutely black. If you leave a potato under your sink or in a dark place for a long time, it just rusts and gets black. Well, brand new quote unquote fresh potatoes coming out of the ground were looking like that.
Wow.
Okay. And the Irish economy had gradually concentrated and built itself up on a very deep dependence on the potato. So rather than having what you might call a pastoral economy where you have some livestock, a few different grains, the potato was so profitable and so nutritious, and ways of cultivating it were so improved in the early 19th century that people just started growing potatoes as a cash crop. And that was bad because, of course, if you have an economy dominated by one crop and that crop fails, then all sorts of terrible things could happen, and did.
So that would make sense why we hear this commonly referred to as the potato famine, I guess.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And there had been blights and sort of bad harvests before in the late 18th century, 1798 and 99, and early 19th century in the teens and 20s, but they didn't last very long. Okay, it's probably because there wasn't as much overwhelming dependence on the potato as there was later in the 1840s. So it's one of these really horrific circumstances where, again, as I say, all these things seem to come together and happen at the same time in a place where they really could do the most damage, and that's what the famine did.
Now, in our back and forth ahead of the show, I believe you indicated we can look at this event in sort of two periods, right? 1845 to 47, and then 1847 to 52, with 1847 being a particularly deadly year. So maybe we could take them in order. What happened from 45 to 47 specifically, and why was 47 so deadly?
Well, 45 to 47 is when the blight starts and then starts to spread. And one of the really horrific parts about the blight is that it starts in the east of Ireland. That's one of the reasons why historians think that it came off the fungus came off a ship and was basically offloaded onto the docks in Dublin, and then spread west. The failure of the crop in the east is very bad in 45 and 46, but then it starts to go across the country, and the government more or less immediately tries to pump in extra grain and extra foodstuffs from outside, right? The government buys a lot of maize from North America and other things, and there's an attempt initially to say, look, this is a one-off thing. It's like the little famines, the little blights in the 20s, 1820s, and before. It's not going to last very long. We'll just have a brief increase in imports, and then it'll be fine. Well, it didn't get any better because the winter was 45, 46 was very bad, and the harvest in 46 into 47 was very bad. It just kept getting worse. That's one of the big problems about the famine, is it just keeps getting worse. Every sort of optimistic time that there's a belief that the next harvest will be okay or the blight will disappear by the next harvest, that never happens. At least it doesn't happen until 1852. So it's a very long famine. That's one of the things that's so awful about it as well. Very long crop failure. 1847 is bad in particular because, again, that harvest of 1846 in the fall was really bad. So what little sort of agricultural surplus of potatoes that might have existed in normal times by 46 was completely gone, meaning the seed potatoes were almost worthless from then on, right? And the famine had spread across the country. So it's really hitting people in the West very, very hard. Relief efforts to get relief out to the west of Ireland proved very difficult, right? It was much easier to set up imports and set up soup kitchens and things in the east. And that's what they call Black 47, is when people start to realize, this is not just a little one or two harvest problem. This is a serious problem. And you get enormous death tolls and then enormous emigration, right? People start to realize, Irish people start to believe anyway, that there's no hope. We have to leave. It's as if the belief in the soil completely goes away. It's almost there's a belief that Irish agriculture will never recover, ever. And so, as you mentioned earlier, there's the best estimates are that 1 million people die during the course of the famine and 1 million people emigrate. Now, this is a small country, right? So to lose, if you will, 2 million people in a span of 5-ish years is really dramatic.
So what about 47 to 52, and how did the famine end?
Okay. Well, 47 to 50, this is one of the myths about the famine, is that Black 47 is bad, but 48 is also bad, right? So it doesn't, after the sort of curve bottoms out, it doesn't ever recover. So 48 is bad, 49 is bad, and two things happened that exacerbated it. One is that there's a change in government in the British Parliament. Before 1846-7, Sir Robert Peel and his Conservative Party had been in government and were the ones pumping in the extra grain, right, and stopping exports and things like that. The idea was never that. And by the way, the British government gets all this wrong. In hindsight, we can see they just keep getting it wrong during the whole course of the famine. But the idea was never that the government should feed all the people, because one of the things that they believe, certainly British public opinion and most government opinion, was that there are systemic things wrong with Irish agriculture, and we have to fix all of them. So, for instance, they thought the landlord system was unfair in Ireland, so we had to tax the landlords to pay for famine relief. Okay, and then the Liberals come in 1847, and that causes another problem in the sense that the Liberal Party believes, or a good section of the sort of leading opinion, the think tank in the Liberal Party believes in laissez-faire economics. Actually, they come in 46, not 47, and that pumping extra into Ireland or stopping exports out of Ireland would mess with the natural order of things. There was this belief that the economy is a natural thing, and if you tinker with it, it just gets worse. So they sort of want to keep free trade going in Ireland, and that causes more problems because there is a severe food shortage.
Right.
They didn't have this sort of late 20th century mentality that you got to just immediately pump food in. That's the only thing you can do. So, again, 47 through 48, there's this very, very deadly effect of this government ideology, and deaths continue to skyrocket. So the Liberal government then quickly changes its mind and tries to provide as much direct aid as possible in the form of soup kitchens and actual what's called outdoor relief, giving poor people and starving people money or giving them direct food. This happens starting in late 47.
So to Kieran's question, you've kind of already answered this off the top, that it was not a plot by the British government, but there's got to be something to this where people are believing it. What are those pieces of evidence?
Well, because it does seem like this laissez-faire attitude does seem as if, not so much that there was a plot like the British intentionally injected the potato crop with the blight that killed the potatoes and then caused the famine, but that once the famine started, once the blight came, as John Mitchell, one of the early Irish nationalists, said, once the blight came, the British said, okay, well, this is our opportunity to get rid of excess Irish population, to keep Ireland further under control, right? So let's let the crop fail, let's let the famine happen, and we'll then have a passive Ireland from now on. Well, that's just literally what didn't happen. It just seems as if it kind of did, because both the conservative government in 45, 46 and the Liberal government after that still seem to believe that keeping trade in grain going, some grain going out of Ireland, some grain coming into Ireland, was the best way to keep the economy alive. So it looks heartless in some sense. But the other reason why it seems so ineffective is that all the government attempts to fix things really don't work. Or what's even worse is at the point in which they seem to start working, right, and people the starvation levels go down like in 48 and 49, the government says, okay, the famine's over, and they stop the relief efforts. And so there's this kind of continual grind of, British, it seems to be indifference and certainly government incompetence, right? And all that in the popular mind is bound to turn into something like, well, this is a genocide. They're just jumping on the opportunity to get rid of us.
You mentioned that they continued to import and export. The listener wrote in, talked about Ireland producing more than enough food during the famine. However, it was exported to Britain. Is there any truth to that? That they had enough food?
No. The lack of food supply was a very severe problem. Not only could Ireland not feed itself, it could only barely feed itself if a ton more outside grain came in. And actually, in Europe at the time, in 46 and 47 especially, and in Britain, there were other food shortages. For instance, in South Wales, there was a potato blight that caused the crop to fail there. There were severe grain failures in Central and North Central Europe that caused hunger. So the 40s are really bad in the 19th century in Europe. So there's really nothing to the idea that Ireland could have fed itself. But there is something to the idea that if the government efforts at providing food through soup kitchens and things like that had been continued and had been expanded, fewer people would have died. Now, this does not mean that they could have saved everybody by any stretch of the imagination. And it was 19th century. It seemed like this calamity, and there literally wasn't enough food, and they weren't handling the situation well, really at all. And for instance, the soup kitchens is what I just mentioned. In 1847, the government starts to build these soup kitchens across the country, and private groups also start to build the soup kitchens, religious groups especially, like the Quakers. And they're very, very successful, but they can't get them set up fast enough. I mean, they do build this extensive network of soup kitchens. It works very, very well eventually. It's just that when the blight is so bad and the famine's so bad, the people are at a certain point where a day or two delay in having their next meal is fatal. It's not as if you can just tough it out for a few days and wait till the soup kitchen gets set up, because you can't. So that works very, very well, considering, granted, that a lot of people are dying anyway, and the soup kitchens can't save everybody. But then it seems as if then in 48, 49, that the soup kitchens are working, and therefore the famine's over, so we'll stop providing them. It's one of these crazy things like, oh, well, we solved the problem. No one expected the famine to last a number of years. Potato blights and crop shortages had always been annual.
Right.
So everyone had always thought, well, 1 year, one harvest is bad. That's okay. But no one expected that the harvest to keep continuing. And then, of course, it just became this sort of snowballing effect.
So does this tie in when you're talking about soup kitchens? You mentioned a couple of terms in your notes that were interesting to me: souperism and taking the soup. What does taking the soup and souperism refer to specifically?
There are a great number of soup kitchens. Soup kitchens were basically, because soup is inexpensive to produce, and you can produce a lot of it, and you can feed a lot of people with it. Wasn't the most nutritious food in the world, mind you, but it was better than what was being provided otherwise. So the government sets up a lot of soup kitchens. The Catholic Church sets up soup kitchens. The Church of Ireland, which is the Anglican Church in Ireland, the same as the Church of England, sets up a lot of soup kitchens. And they all work together very well. And the Quakers set up a lot of soup kitchens, and they all work together very well, work together very diligently and very selflessly. Unfortunately, some what were called Protestant Bible societies, smaller evangelical Protestant groups in Britain, also went over, set up soup kitchens, but in return for getting your bowl of soup, you either had to listen to a Protestant, heavy-duty Protestant sermon, or at least pretend to give up, papacy. In a handful of these Bible Society soup kitchens, people were either greatly, coerced or, coerced into converting to Protestantism, or refused food if they wouldn't convert. It really was a psychosis of those Bible societies. There really were sick people. And so the problem is that then all the other soup kitchens that aren't doing this, which is the vast majority of them, the government ones, the Catholic Church ones, the Church of Ireland ones, the Quaker ones, all the ones that are doing it in what you might consider the normal humanitarian way, the rumor spreads around and the urban myth spreads around, and you folks bust these things. I mean, you know how these things spread more than almost anybody does, that all soup kitchens mean you have to give up your faith in order to get soup. So souperism means forcing people to convert in order to get to feed them. And taking the soup refers to someone who willingly went into a soup kitchen, at least said they would convert to Protestantism, and got soup and survived, and then later were discriminated against by other Catholics in their area for having, at least in theory, abandoned their faith.
Wow.
But see, we're talking about it's a terrible, terrible, terrible thing because it's such a small percentage of, frankly, wackos and bigots who did this, and then that tarred the rest of the soup kitchens with that sort of reputation. So, in other words, some people who were very heavily devout Catholics wouldn't go to a government soup kitchen because they were afraid they would have to give up their beliefs, which wasn't true at all.
Wow.
But, of course, it's like the anti-vaccination campaign. These people, once that thing starts to get out there in the populace, it's very, very hard to dislodge. The government tried all sorts of media campaigns, if you will, to try to stop people thinking that or try to get the correct story out there. But, of course, everyone says, no, that's just part of the thing they're trying to hook you in, bring you in by saying, no, you're not going to convert. And then when you get inside, you have to convert. Well, it just wasn't true.
That's pretty horrible.
It really is the worst sort of religious extremism you can imagine. Apart from killing people directly, beheading people and things like that, it really was awful. And the government tried to ban it, but it was too difficult.
So, Joe, what have we learned about famine relief since the Irish famine? And was the 20th century any better?
Well, what at least the British government and most European governments learned in the 19th century was that you've got all these various attempts setting up soup kitchens, setting up public works projects, building roads and stuff to try to improve the economy. That's not going to help. You have to immediately just feed the people, right? So the whole idea of, we can't mess with the laissez-faire economy, all that went out the window. And so then when there were potato shortages and other agricultural shortages in Ireland later in the century, they didn't do a repeat of what they tried in the famine. They actually just simply started pumping food in. Unfortunately, fortunately in a way, there aren't many of these huge food shortages in Europe for a long, long time, except the obvious ones after the war and things like that. And so people tend to forget all these lessons they learned. And so when there's a famine, when there's a rice shortage in Bengal in India in 1942-43, there's a famine there, and with the war going on and everything, the British government, again, tries to do all these other 6 or 7 different things to correct the famine, and they don't work, and they keep exporting food, and millions and millions of people die in Bengal. It's one of the most horrific tragedies of the 20th century, and there's a great deal of blame to be placed on the British government because of that, because after all, they in theory knew what they should have known about the Irish famine. And so in some ways, I think the 20th century is better. But don't forget, when we had the Ethiopian famine in the 1980s, there were an awful lot of people who were saying, well, what do you expect? They're living in this barren country. The people shouldn't be living there. They're improvident. They don't know what they're doing. They're backwards. They're primitive. And, you all these sort of terrible attitudes would come to the surface about people who were starving to death, sort of deserved to starve to death. And there was a tinge of that in the Irish famine too, and it cropped up again in the 1980s, and it was absolutely terrible. So that's one of the things that distresses me so much about the famine, is that we have learned that immediate and massive food importation and setting up food distribution is essential. Right, it should be just automatic, and the United Nations and other international groups try to do this. But in certain circumstances, you still have this really inhumane attitude towards people who are starving. So that's what I would say. We need to keep reminding ourselves how bad the Irish famine was, how bad the Bengal famine was, and how badly they were handled.
So there are lessons we can learn from the Irish famine moving forward that are applicable in modern day and in the future.
Yeah, especially because, like I say, the Indian famine is in a similar way, and except that there's a war going on, and that's another whole nother show. If you,
we'll have you back.
And the various sort of scattered attempts at relief don't work. The British sort of forget what they learned in the Irish famine, at least in the 40s for the Bengal famine. So it has to be massive importation of food and immediately. And then, if you've got a country or a region or an area where there are economic problems, agricultural problems structurally, yes, then work on those things after, right? So you have a two-pronged approach: immediate relief along with structural fixes. But not structural fixes before immediate relief is just going to cause infinitely more death.
It's so interesting because I wouldn't have thought that an Irish famine that happened in the late 1800s could still inform us today. So I find that really interesting.
Yeah, and distressing. I mean, I know.
And distressing, yeah.
The more I know, the more I worked in history for so many decades now, but the more I learn, the more unconfident I am in the goodness of human nature. For instance, there's this whole idea of the British not caring and this sort of stuff goes all the way up to the top. There's a story that when private relief efforts were started throughout Britain to help the Irish famine, Queen Victoria gave £15 as a donation, right? Which is not very much money. Well, so you see that all across the internet nowadays. So that she's the perfect example of the non-caring British person. When in reality, she gave £2,000, and more importantly for us in the 21st century, in terms of conversion, what that means in today's money, it's very, very difficult to convert, but it means that's between 1 million and 2 million pounds. Okay, so not only is it the £15 thing wrong, she did exactly the opposite. She gave a ton of money. But see, then, people don't believe because it's in their head that then they've grown up that way. It's like the Confederate myth, all the many Confederate myths in the United States after the Civil War. They're just generations and generations are taught that, and it's hard to get it out of them.
Or people can just subscribe to your podcast, right?
They can subscribe to our podcast, yeah. And unfortunately, we've recently had some shows on World War II in the Pacific, and in those shows, we've also bemoaned the brutality of the fighting and the war crimes committed from the Japanese side and from the Allied side all across the Pacific for 5 years, and it's another disheartening thing. So, if anything, I've become much more Professor Peacenik than ever before.
Well, Joe, before we let you go, I think the last time you were on the show is back in February. You mentioned a couple of episodes that you've worked on more recently. Are there any other highlights you want to mention that you've had since we last talked to you?
Or any highlights coming up?
Well, two things are coming up. One is that we opened up our Patreon campaign so that people who support us through Patreon get special and extra episodes, right? That the regular Buzzkillers won't get, and that's as low as just to join that and get those extra shows is only $1 a month. But also, we're trying very, very hard to jump more quickly on very, very current issues and myths and controversies in, say, American politics. For instance, this whole thing about the Squad, the 4 congresswomen being attacked as being socialists and communists and all that sort of stuff. Well, that was not only very shocking, but and ridiculous. It spawned another meme, which was a Harry Truman quote trying to explain why this socialism stuff was just a scare word. And we looked into whether that quote was actually true. And starting Monday, our show about that comes out. So we're trying to become more relevant to contemporary politics. We were avoiding it before because you like to think, I need more time to research this, but so many ridiculous things and crazy controversies seem to come up so much more rapidly these days. We've just got to start picking the worst ones and attacking them right away.
Well, thanks so much for helping us out with this question, Joe. Where can people find you?
They can find us at ProfessorBuzzkill.com. I will try to build a fuller famine episode in the next few weeks to get that going too for listeners to download and subscribe. And of course, Buzzkillers who may be listening to this should subscribe to your show.
Please do.
I concur.
Thanks so much for helping us out today, Joe.
Oh, well, you're welcome. I love the reality check.
Awesome. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Okay.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter @TRC_podcast.